Alan, Valen, Stav, toda rabba. I'll do this in English, of course. So thank you so much, and thanks for everyone for joining us here on this session. So today, what I'm going to be talking to you about is something called just-in-time privileged access management, and I'm going to talk about how we as a company view it as. By the way, can people see my screen?
Yes, we can see it.
Yeah. So just wanted to make sure of that. So how we as a company view it as part of a key component to what is called a CNAPP strategy. So just a little bit about Ermetic before I move on. Ermetic is an holistic cybersecurity solution for the cloud. So it evolves around a bunch of layers when it comes to doing cloud security effectively. As we know, cloud security traditionally was a very layered practice. You need to make sure every layer is protected, and you take care of things, for example, like least privilege and identities and network and data protection and securing your computing runtime environments, secrets, stuff like that. So Ermetic takes care of all these layers, and one of these layers is identity. And one of the abilities that we provide is just-in-time access. And what I wanted to talk to you about is why this is such an important component of what we call CNAPP, right? CNAPP is a recently launched Gartner category, cloud native application protection platform. And it basically revolves around the opportunity there is in the cloud that moving from this sort of layered approach to security can be done in a unified way in the cloud, right? Because in the cloud, we have all these standard public APIs and all this data that we can consume and process all in one place, and integrating all of these abilities together, this gives us as defenders huge potential in order to better secure environments. Because if we can look at everything in one place and do it all in a single pane of glass, we can do things like better prioritization. We can analyze attack graphs and understand where the attackers might come from. We can understand where we can put our resources in order to better secure the cloud. So CNAPP is a really important opportunity when it comes to cloud security. And of course, our product is right there. And one thing that some companies maybe they don't invest enough time in, or they don't invest enough resources in solving, is the permanent access that identities of people, right? That people, as was mentioned before, DevOps professionals or developers have access to the most sensitive environments. So this kind of permanent access is something that needs to be tightly managed, and it doesn't get a lot of spotlight when an holistic security strategy for the cloud is usually discussed, but it is incredibly important. And this is what our JIT solution solves. And before I'm going to get into that and how it actually works, I want to talk about why it's in fact so important. There were mentioned, permissions were mentioned before, and of course they're very significant. It's very important to least privilege the kind of access that people have. But for production environments, and when it comes to people, it's specifically very important. In order to understand why, we need to understand that there is a vital difference between the identities that are used by services, that is identities that are used by workloads, for example, and identities that are used by humans in the way that they behave and in the kind of permissions that you can give them. So service identities are usually consistent, right? They have predicted behavior. And the reason for that is that they usually run code, either code you wrote or code you deployed or code you allowed to have access to your environment. And hopefully you know what that code is supposed to be doing. And if you do, then you can predict what kind of permissions they will need, and they usually stay in put. Now, for that reason, this kind of identity is really suited for right-sizing the kind of permissions that it gets, right? I mean, you can predict or you can even analyze. This is one thing that our product does very well, is looking at logs and what the identity actually did, and then giving you the precise right-size policy that you can then apply to it, right? It's very fitted for that. And of course, as we mentioned, the permissions, they rarely change, right? They change when maybe the spec changes, and that doesn't happen, hopefully every day. But when it comes to humans, So humans are almost by design, they're not predictable, right? You don't know what it is that they're going to supposed to be doing, right? By definition of their job. Because if you did, if they were consistent and predictable, you would perhaps, automate their job and let them focus on something that you would need more creativity in, right? So for that reason, it's very hard to right-size the kind of permissions that they get. So they usually get very broad permissions that they require in order to do their job, and you can't really predict that they will need less. And also they would tell you sometimes, look, I need more permissions. And you would give them those kind of permissions and they would just kind of stay there, right? Creating what is called an attack surface or a blast radius from them being compromised. Now, of course, as we know, humans are also very, very vulnerable. They are a very weak link in your security chain. If, for example, you provide them with access in the form of static credentials, which of course you really, really usually shouldn't. But if you do, then those kind of credentials, they leak, they put them in a Slack channel, or they put them in public resources like S3 buckets, and then some malicious actor has access to your environment. That's really, really bad. And of course, humans are very, very prone to social engineering, right? They can be phished or they can be corrupted. And for that reason, they are, in fact, very, very vulnerable. And that combination of them being a vulnerable link in your chain and usually having a very, very sensitive and very broad access to your environment. We talk about high-profile users like administrators or DevOps professionals or developers. That is something that you really want to limit your risk from, right? You can do a lot of things in the cloud. You can do a lot of fancy cloud security stuff. And of course, they're very important and we also take care of that. But once you have that kind of vulnerable place, that really is all an attacker would need in order to gain leverage. So what to do? So for that reason, we introduced something called just-in-time access to our platform, which allows you to only provide permissions for a limited spec of time, and that is in the hours, for only a specific purpose, in a way that is seamless, right? In a way that is a very, very good user experience and doesn't hurt business functionality and limits dramatically the kind of risk that you have from permanent credentials, because the permanent credentials and the permanent permissions don't exist. So what we aim to have is something called zero standing trust. That is for those sensitive environments, those production environments or production where you keep sensitive information. There's minimal or almost no permanent, that is standing permissions, right? So even if credentials are leaked in some way or users are phished, then unless it's a very sophisticated mechanism that will also give them the permissions, and we'll see how it works in a second, then the blast from that breach would be limited. Now, users in that approach may be eligible, right? They can request permissions when they need them, but of course, the permissions are not there permanently. Now, they only do it for a specific business justification. So they say, I'm going to need this permission to this account for this very specific reason. And then those requests can be approved. And when the duration of the specific session for which they requested and got the permissions, when it's over in just a few hours, the permissions are then gone, right? They are revoked automatically, and it's not something that you need to keep track of and need to go back and remove it. It gets removed automatically. So that is the point. So the way it works, and just here is an example of how we do it in AWS, we work with something called AWS IAM Identity Center, and you can provide permanent access, for example, for a testing account and for a production account. Our platform, what it does, it allows the users to go and request access. And once that access is approved, the platform automatically manages the permissions just in time, provides the access, and then takes it away. And just a little bit more elaborate, the way it works, right, in a very broad architecture, is that we have a requester and we have an approver. So the requester signs in through their identity provider to their AWS environment, and they go to Ermetic, they request the access. It's notified to the approver that new access is needed. The approver can, of course, approve it. And the management of the permissions just in time is done again by Ermetic. And another nice benefit, and we're also going to see this now in a short demonstration is that Ermetic can also interface with third-party tools. So for example, your email or your Slack, in order to create this kind of seamless experience, right? So users don't need to go to another pane of glass. They don't need another platform. It's part of their experience, and they can make requests and have them approved. And also notifications can be sent through there. So without further ado, I'm going to show you a short demonstration of how this kind of approach works in our product. So this is how it is. So in the demonstration that we're going to see right now, we have an AWS environment with 3 accounts. There's a testing account, a staging account, and a production account, right? Which of course the production account is very sensitive. So we have a JIT requester, and that JIT requester is a developer. And the developer has permanent access to the testing account and the staging account. And let's say that for some reasons they would need access to the production account, for example, to solve production issues. Now, they're going to get this kind of access temporarily through our platform. So what we have here is we have 2 browsers side by side. One browser is of the developer, the one here on the right, and the other browser on the left is the one of the approver, the one in the purple. And the developer has access, as we see, to the staging account and the testing account. Now, what we can go and do for them, and this is from the admin console of Ermetic, we can create what is called an eligibility. So an eligibility is not, in fact, permissions, but it's the permission to request permissions. So the way it would work, we would configure who's the one eligible to make that kind of request, what kind of permissions that they can get, the maximum duration that they can have for that time, for a session, and the person that is able to approve this kind of access. Now, once this eligibility is created, we can go in Ermetic, and we'll also see in a short second how we can do it in a seamless way without another pane of glass, and request access based on that eligibility. So we can get the account, we can choose the role, we can set the duration, which we saw the maximum amount for, and insert the justification that we need. So when we make the request, it's done in a specific context. And we will see how that becomes even more important towards the end. Now, when the request is made, the approver gets notified of it. They can, of course, go and approve it. And once they do, then the request is granted. Now the developer has also access to the production account. But of course, that access is only granted for that specific duration. When the duration is over, the access is gone. Now, of course, as we mentioned before, one thing you might ask yourself, okay, why do I need another pane of glass? This would make a hassle for our developers. This is not great. And of course, the developer experience is something that is very, very important, and we want things to be seamless, and we don't want for any kind of delay in velocity. So what we did was we integrated this with Slack. Now, Slack is something, of course, that is a very, very popular messaging tool. We all know it. And what we are able to do is give the developer the ability to just do /Ermetic JIT AWS. That's all they need to do. And they get the same panel that they would get in Ermetic right here, right? Because of the integration with Ermetic, Slack knows what kind of eligibility the developer has. So they can select the account. They can, again, of course, select the role. They can set the duration. They can set the justification, just like they would be able to from the Ermetic console, and make the request. Now, the request was made, and here, when we have the developer point of view, the approver point of view, so the approver gets notified in Slack of a new request, right? And then they can approve it, right? Just from their Slack console, they don't need as well another console, another pane of glass. It's a completely seamless experience. And also, of course, you have this Slack conversation with the Ermetic application where the requests are logged. the approval is notified in a thread on the request. So that's also very, very nice. And when the access is in fact granted, they can connect directly from a link they get here. And now they have the access. Now, one final thing, and of course that access is the same as we saw before, it's removed when the duration is over. Now, one final thing, which is a very, very crucial aspect of this ability is the auditing ability, right? The real benefit, other than not having permanent credentials that, permissions, sorry, that if credentials are phished or hacked in some way, they create a bigger blast radius. Another huge benefit to that is that when access is in fact done to those sensitive environments, right, to those production, mission critical, even environments with very, very sensitive data, when that access is actually done, it's controlled in a certain period of time. And that allows you to have a very, very tight auditing ability to what happened during those sessions, right? Because you can't go and review what happened all the time in those environments every day, right? You probably have things that require your attention. But when access is only done in specific period of time, let's say a developer really did have a production issue and they were on call and they said, okay, now I need this kind of access to solve the problem, give it to me for that duration and I'm going to solve it. Great, you got it. It's over, right? And then it's done. And then I can also go for that session where they got the access. I can go and do auditing on it. And let's see exactly what this means. So in the auditing console, we get a list of the sessions, the requests, whether they were approved or rejected, and we can go to each request. And if, in fact, there was access done in the access that was granted, we can go and view the user activity during that session. So for example, here, what we have is information from CloudTrail that we parsed in this very nice table that you can go and filter and look for a specific kind of actions, maybe very sensitive actions like, for example, attach role policy, which is a very, very sensitive thing. Maybe the developer did things that they weren't supposed to do during this session. And you can go and review what happened when that access was actually granted. Now, this is, of course, very specifically important if something bad happened, right? If you want to do an investigation or you want to look into, to troubleshoot maybe something very, very sensitive happened during that session, and you want to review it and maybe found what the problem was. So that's, again, another thing that you can do here that would otherwise be very, very, very difficult because here, the access, the actual access, the practical access to those environments is controlled by the dimension of time, which is very, very important. Of course, you should always aspire to least privilege, but on top of that, you want to limit the access in as many dimensions as you can when it comes to really sensitive environments. So to sum up, the benefits of this kind of just-in-time approach for your sensitive environments is that the blast radius is really limited when it comes to breaches, right? The difference between an identity that has really strong permanent permissions being breached and an identity that doesn't is, of course, something that I don't need to explain. And that is huge. And the other thing is that you can do session monitoring and you can do very effective auditing very easily when you grant this kind of access on a just-in-time basis. And as we've seen, the experience that can be achieved is really, really seamless, right? It's really, really smooth. And it really gives you all these kind of benefits with little or no damage to business functionality. So that was my presentation. I really like to thank you for your time. And if you have any more questions about this feature or anything else that we do or anything when it comes to cloud security, I would love to answer.